snow-choked cedar notches saloon as a bitter wind howled through the frozen pines. Its icy fury lashing the weather like a vengeful spirit. In that grim twilight of 1880s Montana, where every breath crystallized in the air, fate took a sudden turn. Amid the raucous murmurs of gamblers and dusty drifters inside the establishment, a furtive exchange unfolded in a shadowed corner. Amos Hensley, a gaunt man with eyes as cold as the winter itself, passed a small bundle into the trembling hands of a young, pregnant girl. Clara Hensley, barely 23 and heavy with child, clutched the bundle close to her heart as if it were her salvation. Within it lay a satchel that concealed a secret peril, illicitly acquired from a stolen treasury of cattle wages. Amos's greed had compelled him to sell his own sister, the one he claimed was weak and dispensable. His parting words echoed bitterly as he melted back into the swirling snows. "Take it and run, girl." Just as midnight's chill began to seep into every crack of the dilapidated saloon, Clara, her mind swirling with fear and sorrow, escaped into the raging blizzard. Her soft humming, an old hymn sung by her mother, accompanied each desperate step as she evaded the oppressive glare of the town. With snow biting at her skin and heart heavy with betrayal, she stumbled through the storm until fate led her to collapse in a shallow drift on the outskirts of Dust Vale Ranch. There, beneath a canopy of towering junipers and ancient pine, the solitary figure of Elias Ward, a weathered lumberjack in his mid-40s, emerged from the deep silence. Elias, whose life had been spent amongst frost-bound forests and echoing chains of timber, had long retreated into solitude after losing his beloved wife in a merciless blizzard years ago. He'd found solace only in the rhythmic swing of his axe and the rough, honest labor of felling snow-laden pines. That night, as he whittled a small spruce charm, an emblem of memories and regret, he heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the frozen earth. Instinct compelled him to follow the sound, and soon he discovered Clara, shivering and barely conscious near a copse of snow-drifted pines. Her pale face, streaked with frozen tears, told of hardship beyond measure. As he gently lifted her from the snow, Elias was struck by a deep, silent resolve. "Hold on now," he murmured in his gravelly voice, wrapping his thick woolen coat around the trembling woman. Despite the bitter winds and the oppressive cold, a spark of compassion warmed his rugged features. He carried her with care back to his isolated log cabin, its walls bearing scars of past tragedies and a solitude that had become his only companion. Inside the cabin, the fire, long dormant since the night of his wife's passing, was coaxed back to life. Elias stoked the embers until they blazed with a tentative warmth. As Clara lay on a rough-hewn cot, her breath shallow and rapid, he examined her closely. The satchel, peeking out from beneath her threadbare shawl, intrigued him further. Its worn leather bore the marks of many travels, and though its content were hidden away from the casual eye, Elias sensed it held more than a mere peril. It guarded a secret that could change everything. By the flickering light of the hearth, while the wind raged outside like the long-forgotten cries of the damned, Elias carefully set about tending to Clara. He removed the icy layers from her limbs and wrapped her in blankets that smelled of burnt wood and resin. As she did, a soft, haunting hum escaped her lips, a hymn of hope and heartbreak interwoven. In that moment, as time slowed to a measured beat, the lonely lumberjack felt the tight grip of his own isolation begin to loosen. For the first time in many long years, he found himself questioning the walls he had built around his here. Outside, far from the refuge of Dust Vale Ranch, the storm raged on with unrelenting fury. In the distant expanse of the frontier, figures moved silently through the snow. Among them, Rufus Kane, an unsavory bounty hunter hired by Amos Hensley, tracked the scent of one who betrayed his own kin. Rufus's eyes, narrowing as he scanned the swirling white, missed nothing, for he believed that in acquiring Clara and her hidden satchel, he would claim a handsome bounty. His presence was a dark promise looming over the storm, a threat that would soon entwine with the fates of those at Dust Vale. In the quiet hours before dawn, while Clara slept fitfully, Elias sat close to the fire. He pondered aloud softly. This case, this hidden peril, it don't seem right. His mind wandered a memory of his lost wife, the warmth of her smile now only a ghost in the quivering light, and he vowed silently that, for the sake of this fragile life now intertwined with his, he would see justice done. The old chains that once rattled in the logging camp now seemed to echo with the weight of destiny. He resolved to keep Clara safe, even if it meant confronting the harsh, unforgiving wilderness and those who would harm her for their greed. As the night deepened, the heavy silence was broken only by the rhythmic sound of the wind rushing against the cabin's walls and the soft, steady plucking of frost on the branches outside. Ruth's absence was marked only by a few discarded belongings. It was clear that she had been left behind by necessity or by fate. For tonight, it was only Clara who lay in need of care. The harsh judgment of men in Cedar Notch and the bitter whispers that had already begun in the saloons could haunt us so long after the storms of winter had passed. Yet here in the gentle glow of rekindled firelight, Elias felt the stirring of something nearly forgotten. The promise of a new beginning, of healing stretched across the endless white expanse. He carefully set the satchel on a rough table and, with deliberate hands, opened it just enough to glimpse the crinkled edges of its secret. A faded token of a stolen parole, a document bearing blue ink stains and half-erased figures. Peeked out, the implications wore within his mind, a stolen claim, a betrayal, and a heavy cost of greed. For Elias, whose days had been measured by the swing of his axe and whose nights by the memory of love lost. Such secrets were a dangerous lure. Yet, as he regarded the battered document, he knew that this mystery might, in some strange way, offer redemption for his own tortured past. Before he could ponder further, a sudden, jarring crash outside snapped him to attention. The idea that someone or something had come for Clara sent his heart pounding like a drum. He sprang from his wooden chair, clutching his ever-present axe, and looked out through the frost-covered window. In the swirling darkness, the howling wind seemed to carry a faint cry, a summons of retribution. His breath caught as he sensed a presence in the distance, the subtle sound of heavy boots muffled beneath layers of snow. "Caleb, no, Elias," muttered himself. "Who dares disturb this night?" His voice, low and determined, blended with the cracked timbre of a storm. Outside, in that relentless storm of ice and despair, danger crept unseen. Rufus Kane, the bounty hunter, had begun his pursuit, drawn by the scent of the stolen pearl and the promise of reward. His approach was silent but deadly, his resolve firm as the frozen landscape that stretched unbroken before him. With dawn still hours away, Elias knew that his decision was already made. In the face of unspeakable cold and looming threats, he would protect Clara and her secret, letting the sharp edges of his grief and guilt serve as armor against those who would seek to exploit their plight. As the wind continued to howl and the snow carved silence into every corner of Dustvale, a single question began to echo in his mind, a question that would shape the fragile hours ahead. Who chases through the frozen night for Clara's hidden peril? And what secret lies within that satchel that can change so much? With the bitter storm pounding the land and an unseen threat drawing near, will the mystery of the satchel remain safe, or will darkness claim it before the first light of day? A low wind sighed to frozen pines that surrounded Dustvale Ranch, carried with it the ghostly echoes of the recent storm. In the still darkness after Clara's unexpected discovery, Elias Ward stepped silently from his cabin onto the porch. The memory of the crash, a metallic thud drowned in a howling blizzard, and the screams of the wind still haunted him. With each measured step toward the barn, where the remnants of that night lingered like ice on the tongue, he recalled his first impression, a lone figure, battered by the storm, lying amidst snow and pine needles. Now, the lingering night held no promise of immediate safety. Elias reached the barn, a creaking structure of weathered boards and fading paint. The fire that had long been abandoned in its hearth had been rekindled, and its weak, dancing flames provided scant warmth against the biting cold. As he inspected the building, he discovered crisp tracks in the snow, wolf tracks, he surmised, their prints large and deliberate across the yard. He stooped to study them, noting how the animals' paws, smeared with fresh blood and the dampness of melting snow, led toward the thicket. His eyes narrowed. Something in these tracks unsettled him beyond mere wild creatures. Perhaps there were other dangers amid these dark, pine-shrouded lands. Determined to secure his newfound sanctuary, Elias set about preparing the defenses around the cabin. He gathered long, flexible branches from the pines, their resin coating sticky and biting against the chill. Slowly, under the dim light of a sputtering lantern, he fashioned crude traps, arranging the branches in cunning loops and snaring positions around vulnerable access points, particularly near the large eastern window of the cabin. Each trap was placed with care, the rough, callous fingers of a man who had nothing left to lose but his loneliness. Every timber creak and whisper wood was a silent vow against the lurking threat. Inside the cabin, the early hours bore a gentleness that contrasted the storm's fury. Clara Hensley stirred slowly from a fitful sleep. Awakening on a thin, rough cot near a low-burning fire, she blinked in the dim light. The lingering echo of her hymn, a soft, mournful melody she had hummed unconsciously through the night, merged with the low murmur of the wind outside. She sat upright, drawing the threadbare blanket around her swollen belly as if to guard her unborn child. Though haunted by memories of her betrayal and the desperate escape from the saloon's cold confines, she carried herself with a quiet dignity born of survival. In the kitchen, the solitary lamp threw shifting shadows across rough-hewn walls. As she made her way there, Clara's gaze fell on the satchel that had been thrust into her possession by her treacherous brother, Amos. Its worn leather, softened by the biting cold, seemed to pulse with a secret known only to fate. The satchel had bumbled from her arms as she fled the blizzard, and now lay beside a battered wooden table. With trembling fingers, she lifted it, feeling the weight of its concealed contents. She knew little of the peril hidden within, only that it bore evidence of a crooked deal, a stolen sum that now made her an object of scorn. Still, beneath her sorrow, she found solace in the quiet strains of her hymn echoing in the dim light, a prayer for deliverance for both herself and the life growing inside her. Outside, as the hours passed slowly and the wind's lament mingled with the creaks of the timber, Elias returned from his patrol along the perimeter. His breath formed small, white puffs in the frigid air. In his steady gaze, a mixture of lingering grief and determined purpose shone forth. He had found another length of charred rope, freshly burned and draped carelessly over a split post along the fence. The dark fibers, stiff and accusing in the pale moonlight, were unmistakable. The warning had grown louder. Now, it was clear that someone with ill intent was drawing ever nearer to Dustvale Ranch, the same unseen force that had driven Clara from the saloon and into his arms. Elias recalled the cold, hard edge of his grief and the promise he had whispered in the solitude of that first night. He remembered how he had sheltered her, how his heart had, for the first time in years, felt the tender pull of responsibility and hope. With a solemn resolve, he retreated into the cabin and carefully hid the satchel beneath a loose floorboard, secure, hidden away from prying eyes of those who might use its secret against him. As if to further test his emerging defenses, faint crunches of footsteps were heard outside, subtle, measured, and undeniably human. Through the frost-laced window, Elias spied a dark, swaying figure moving slowly along the ridge. The sight sent an involuntary shiver coursing down his spine, and a foreboding sense of being watched pierced the tranquility of the night. That figure, Rufus Kane, the cunning bounty hunter hired by Amos, had a superstition that the pine shadows concealed evil. And now, as his track circled ever nearer to the warm-lighted cabin, the threat became all too real. Elias stepped outside once more, gripping the handle of his axe, a time-worn tool that cut through more than just timber. The axe's head, worn smooth by years of hard labor, gleamed faintly in the meager light as he scanned the silent, snow-blanketed expanse. In the distance, the low moan of the wind mingled with a faint rustling in the pine boughs, a sound that might have been the scuttle of small animals or something more sinister. His heart pounded steadily as he resolved to keep his traps ready and his mind sharp. "Stay low," he muttered to himself with a gravelly intensity, his every instinct tuned to the threat that may soon materialize under the dancing shadows of the pines. Back inside, Clara sat by the rekindled hearth, now fully awake and tending to herself with a quiet courage. She resumed her hymn softly, a gentle refrain that transcended the bitter cold. Every note echoed like a promise of resilience and release from the ghostly weight of her past. In that melody lay both vulnerability and the unspoken determination to rise above the shame that had followed her since the day Amos betrayed her. Although she said little, her eyes held a storm of emotions, fear, hope, and a resolve that grew stronger with every passing moment. In the stillness, Ruth, who had been busy organizing the sparse room that served as their temporary lodging, entered with a furrowed brow. "Caleb," she called softly, her voice laced with both worry and steely determination. "The town's been whispering. They say no shame under God's roof, but our name's stained for all to see. We must be ready." Her words, though measured and calm, carried the weight of a life spent under judgment and loss. Caleb only nodded, his eyes not leaving the dark horizon. The charred rope and the fresh tracks of Rufus' cane were constant reminders that their safety was precarious. Outside, the night pressed on with relentless quiet. The pine trees creaked under the weight of a frozen wind, and the scent of wet pine needles mingled with that of burning wood. In that charged atmosphere, Caleb's resolve crystallized. He moved from one trap to the next along the cabin's perimeter, ensuring each pine branch snare was set impeccably. Every so often, the wind carried a murmur, a ghostly whisper among the pines, that seemed to challenge his vigilance. As the minutes stretched into an eternity, the soft, haunting hymn of Clara drifted out the window and mingled with the murmuring pines, a tender counterpoint to the harshness of the frozen night. In that delicate sound, Caleb found a strange comfort. It reminded him of the love he had lost and perhaps the new hope that might yet flourish. Guilt and sorrow had long been his constant companions. Yet now, in the quiet company of this woman and her child's promise, his hardened heart began to thaw. Still, the threat lingered. Every so often, he caught a glimpse of movement along the ridge, a tail of tracks displacing the falling snow, urging him to remain ever watchful. With his axe steady in hand and his eyes scanning the dark, frostbitten wilderness, Caleb vowed to hold his ground. His mind raced with urgent questions, each as sharp as the bite of the winter wind. How close was Rufus's shadow winding its way among the pines? What dark purpose lay hidden within Clara's satchel, that secret enough to ignite such peril? In a final moment before sleep could claim him once more, Caleb retreated to the quiet of his cabin. He sat near the restored fire, its dancing flames illuminating the scars etched on the wooden walls. The solitude was heavy with both hope and dread, a fragile equilibrium between redemption and the darkness that lurked just beyond the pine-clad horizon. As his eyes weighed heavily upon the flickering light, a final thought coalesced into a single, piercing question that cut through the silence like the edge of his well-worn axe. How close is Rufus's shadow, and what does the satchel hold that now threatens to shatter our fragile refuge? With wolf tracks in the snow and the bitter whisper of an approaching enemy, will the secret within the satchel bring salvation or doom upon Dustvale Ranch? A brittle wind swept over the frozen expanse, and the world seemed reduced to white silence and brittle pine. In the dim light of waning fire, Elias Ward retrieved the hidden satchel from beneath a loose floorboard, its leather cold and worn by countless storms. With trembling, deliberate hands, he unfastened the strap and lifted the bundle, expecting few secrets. Instead, his eyes fell on a jumble of payroll documents, edges curled from damp and neglect. Scrawled upon them were faded numbers and cryptic accounts linking the stolen funds to a stagecoach robbery, a betrayal that confirmed his growing suspicion. Amos Hensley had cheated Clara of more than dignity. Inside the cabin, where the fire's soft glow lent a fragile warmth to the cold room, Clara stirred from fitful sleep. Her cheeks, pale as the winter sky outside, lifted in a strained smile as she detected the rustling of papers. They belong to me," she whispered, her voice catching like a brittle branch in a storm. But the words carried more than ownership. They spoke of shame and fear, a fear that solidified years of torment and injustice. Amos, he took it all, Clara admitted haltingly, her eyes fixed on the documents, trembling under the weight of truth. She clutched her stomach protectively, feeling the unborn child's quiet stir beneath her fading him. Elias's jaw tightened. The stolen peril was not just paper. It was a dark ledger of lost honor and greed. Amos, he murmured, his voice low and steady, laced with personal grief born of betrayal. His thoughts dovetailed with memories of his late wife, a woman whose warmth had been lost to a merciless blizzard, and now the specter of shame seemed to echo through Clara's confession. Yet beneath that echo lay a flicker of resolve. He gently folded the documents and pressed them close to his heart before tucking the satchel away in a secret nook within the cabin. In that act, he vowed to safeguard not only Clara's past, but also her future. Outside, the bitter darkness was punctuated by a sudden, harsh snap. A trap of pine branches triggered under the weight of unwary feet. From a frozen ground came a harsh sound, like bones breaking under strain, alerting Elias to an unwelcome intrusion. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the distinctive marks of human boots disturbed by icy shrapnel. Rufus Kane's men had found one of his pine branch traps, a crude snare that he had set with calculated precision along the forest edge. The trap's trigger had sent splinters of pine crashing, effectively alerting him to the enemy's approach. "Move fast," he ordered in a quiet, gruff tone. His voice carried the weight of hardship and determination. Without pausing, he rushed to the door and found Clara already awake, her soft and faltering as she sensed the urgency. "We must not linger," she managed to say, her voice a fragile thread against the wail of the wind. Elias gathered her carefully into his arms, the satchel pressed securely against his chest, as though it were a secret too dangerous to display. With each step through the deepening snow, the biting cold stung his face, and the weight of the payroll documents bore the burden of Amos's deception. Beyond the cabin, the world was a swirling maelstrom of white and shadow. The tracks of Rufus's men, etched sharply in the powdered snow, led toward the dense stands of pine, with the sound of approaching footsteps echoing in the distance. Elias's spine straightened. He turned and met the gaze of Maeve Tobin, a widowed trapper known throughout the region for her uncanny knowledge of the wilderness and for healing herbs that could mend both body and spirit. Maeve's weathered face was set in a mask of grim determination as she delivered a terse warning. "Amos's bounty is on Clara, and Rufus is closing in. The drifter hunts for what he believes is rightfully his." Her words, spoken in a low, steady drawl, added layers to the terror not yet spoken aloud. Maeve's presence, however, also brought the promise of an ally. "We must leave now," she insisted, gesturing toward the gully where the towering pines seemed to murmur secrets through the falling snow. With nothing left to be lost but honor, Elias nodded. "We head for my trading post," he said solemnly, his eyes glinting with resolve even as the wind whipped past. "It's not far from here, and the town of Cedar Notch will shield us until we can set things right." As they stepped out into the endless white, the snow crunching underfoot like fragile hopes, Clara's softened rose anew. The melody, once timid and faltering, now grew with a hidden strength. "Hush!" Elias whispered as he gently guided her along the snowbound trail, his strong arms shielding her from harsh, cutting winds. In the distance behind them, Rufus's men continued to trample through the drifts, their low curses carried on the wind, each coarse syllable laced with the superstition of the frontier, fearing the power of the pine shadows that had all manner of ill omens. The trail was treacherous, winding through a forest of towering pines whose dark boughs bowed under layers of frost. Light from the half-awakened moon glittered on icicles, and every so often, the soft creak of a falling branch reminded them that the forest was alive with ancient, silent threats. Elias adjusted his grip on his axe, its weight of familiar comfort in these perilous moments. His eyes, steeled against the encroaching night, remained vigilant as he led the trio onward, each step punctuated by the understanding that their sanctuary was collapsing beneath the burden of Amos's treachery and Rufus's relentless pursuit. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying secrets and curses in the same breath. Maeve's earlier warning echoed in his mind as rays of pale moonlight danced among the frost. He recalled the payment of silent tears he had shed for his lost wife, and felt a kinship with the sorrow etched on Clara's face. As the air stung like needles, the sound of distant voices, Rufus's men drawing near, raised attention palpably. Their presence was not yet overt, but the shadow of an imminent chase hung heavily over the snow-clad forest. Halfway to the trading post, they paused near a narrow clearing where the snow lay undisturbed like a sheet of morning. It was there that Clara's voice, quiet and tremulous, broke the silence. I was called Thief's Kin," she confessed, eyes downcast, the words heavy with centuries of dishonor. The admission, raw and unfiltered, stirred a storm within Elias. "You're not that," he replied, voice resolute despite the chill. "Your worth is not measured by others' lives." His tone, rough as the bark of the pine, tried desperately to inject hope into her wounded spirit. In that fleeting exchange, something within Clara shifted, a fragile defiance, a promise that her future need not be dictated by her past. Their conversation was cut short by the sudden, harsh sound of a branch snapping under weight. The tension became almost unbearable as the voices of Rufus's men, low and determined, echoed through the forest. Elias knew that time was precious. With a firm grip on Clara's hand, he urged, "Keep moving, stay close." The trio advanced into the swirling storm of flurries, their path illuminated intermittently by flickers of pale moonlight that revealed the stark, relentless beauty of the snowy wilderness. Yet, even as they fled, a final note of dread hovered in the frigid air, a sense that the enemy was never far behind. The echo of footsteps, the crunching of snow under boot, and a distant, ragged shout made it clear. Rufus's relentless pursuit was fast closing the gap. As they pressed onward, every frozen gust of wind and every shifting shadow among the pines spoke of ominous intent. The relentless cold pressed on them, and with each step their hearts pounded louder. Elias's mind churned with one pressing question that seemed to ride the wind with him. Will Clara's child arrive before Rufus's pursuit overwhelms us, or will Amos's lies doom our sanctuary? With the stolen peril's dark legacy weighing heavy and the frozen forest echoing with threats, will hope persevere as they escape into the storm, or will the pursuit of his enemies shatter the fragile refuge they seek? A bitter blizzard roared around Maeve Tobin's trading post, where frozen pine boughs bowed beneath the weight of fresh snow and the wind howled like a vengeful chorus. Inside, the old wooden structure struggled to hold back the storm. The air was heavy with the scent of burning pine resin and wet earth. Tonight, desperation and determination mingled with the crackling wind. Outside, the world was reduced to a vortex of white and shadow, a realm where only the hardiest survived. Within the trading post's modest walls, hushed urgency had taken hold. Clara Hensley, her pale face streaked with frost and determination, labored in a cramped corner near a sputtering stove. The pain of labor had intensified with the storm, each contraction a fierce reminder of the life growing within her. Around her, the sounds of the blizzard pounded relentlessly against the building, and a low murmur of hushed prayers and whispered hymns smoothed the edges of fear. In that precarious moment, her soft, halting hymn, once nearly lost in the wintry din, soared with determination and hope. Elias Ward stood by her side, his expression grim as he worked tirelessly to shield her from both the cold and the encroaching threat that the storm carried. Scarce light from the failing lantern danced over his weathered features, etched by years of solitude and grief. He, who had lost his beloved in a merciless blizzard long ago, now burdened with a duty he never sought, he guarded Clara with an intensity born of deep sorrow and newfound resolve. His strong hands gripped his trusty axe, its handle worn smooth by labor, as if it were an extension of his very soul. Despite the fury of the storm outside, his focus was unwavering. As Clara's labor pains grew stronger, the trading post was suddenly split by a violent crash from outside, a piercing sound like splintered branches and colliding metal. Elias's eyes snapped to the door, and he moved abruptly, calling to Maeve, who had been tending supplies in a shadowed corner of the post. "Stay here now," he ordered softly, his voice low and determined. As he stepped outside into the maelstrom, the storm nearly swallowed him whole as he emerged from the relative warmth of the building. Snow whipped across his face, and the wind's fury blurred the outlines of distant trees into ghostly shapes. In the tumult, Elias saw figures advancing to the flurry. 2 riders, grim and intent. It was now clear. The attack had come not by chance, but by design. Rufus Kane, the superstitious bounty hunter, and Amos Hensley himself, whose greed and betrayal had long tainted Clara's fate, had come to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Their eyes glinted with malice beneath furrowed brows, and as they drew near to Maeve's post, the very pines around them seemed to shudder in warning. Elias gripped his axe tighter and raised his flintlock rifle. He knew that the storm, its fury a wild ally, could be turned against his foes. He rushed toward the group, each step measured in the knee-deep snow. The roar of the wind was punctuated by the staccato beat of his own heavy boots, and every swirling flake seemed to carry with a promise of retribution. The figures, now distinct and snarling in the icy gloom, advanced with a grim relentlessness that chilled his blood. "Hold them off!" Elias shouted through the roar, his voice a defiant clang against the howling storm. The riders, unfazed by the tumultuous weather, circled closer with sneers. Rufus's eyes, wild with fanatic suspicion, darted about the darkness as though expecting to be haunted by the very spirits of the pines. Amos's face, etched with greed and bitterness, contorted as he demanded, "That satchel and every scrap it holds is ours." His words were carried away by the gale, but their malice echoed in the frozen air. Elias responded with a steady barrage of rifle fire. The sharp crack of his flintlock echoed off the distant canyon walls, and several of the attackers faltered in surprise. In the chaos, the fury of the storm lent an almost magical quality to the forest. The tall pines, their branches heavy with snow, swayed and creaked as if in tribute to nature's noose. Elias used that shifting cover, darting between shadows and ferocious blasts of wind. His axe, a heavy, deliberate instrument of survival, swung in wide arcs, felling a low-hanging branch that crashed into one assailant's path, sending him tumbling into a patch of deep snow. Inside, the atmosphere in the trading post grew tense as Maeve Tobin, eyes narrowed with determination, emerged from behind a rough-hewn counter, clutching her ledger, the record of debts and stolen perils that exposed Amos's guilt. She opened the door to witness the unfolding battle. "By God, Amos's lies have brought the storm upon us," she spat, her voice rough as gravel. "Let's see if you can stand against truth." Her words carried a weight that bolstered Elias further. Amid the melee, Clara's labor had surged with a desperate urgency. The harsh wails of the storm mingled with her cries as she clutched at the linen draped around her, her eyes searching the darkness for reassurance. In the frenzied skirmish outside, she was largely hidden, shielded by the sturdy walls of the post and the valiant efforts of those who now fought for her. Yet, even amid chaos, a profound grace shone in her resolute face. Her hymn, once soft and trembling, had taken on a deeper, more determined quality. Elias, though wounded by a stray bullet that grazed his shoulder, refused to falter. With each swing of his axe and each shot from his rifle, he fought not just for his own redemption, but for fragile sanctuary that now bound him to Clara. Every blow struck was a memory exorcised, the memory of loss, the sting of betrayal, and every fallen enemy a testament to the worth of mercy and protection. The battle's crescendo came when, battered by the relentless winter and the grim persistence of their attackers, Rufus Kane's fury began to wane. His superstitious dread of the shifting pine shadows seemed to gnaw at his resolve. In one final, desperate moment, he faltered as the storm's wild music drowned out his bitter curses. His men, disoriented by the overpowering cry of nature, slowly retreated into the swirling depths of the blizzard. Amos, his eyes burning with unspent venom, merely snarled a vow of revenge as he faded into the white wilderness. In the aftermath, silence reclaimed the battleground, a silence heavy with the scent of pine sap and smoldering embers. Elias staggered back toward the trading post, his arm throbbing but his spirit unbowed. He found Clara cradled by Maeve, whose steady hands tended to the newborn cries of a tiny, fragile life. Against the backdrop of the dying storm and the soft, persistent echo of a hymn, Clara had given birth to a daughter. In that delicate instant, hope had been reborn. Ruth, who had been hidden away for her safety, arrived shortly, her eyes glistening with relief and a quiet pride that belied the darkness she had endured. As the wind's relentless roar gently receded, the group gathered near the entrance of the trading post. Elias, with profound heaviness in his gaze, gently lifted the satchel from a small clearing in the snow, burying it once more beneath a mound of pristine ice and pine boughs, a secret held sacred, as unyielding and bitter like the debts that had almost destroyed them. Caleb, no, Elias, stood tall despite his wounded shoulder, his breath ragged in the cold air. His gaze swept over the remnants of the attack, the flattened snow, the scattered pine branches, and then rose to meet the solemn eyes of Clara, whose own countenance had softened from fear to resolute acceptance. The newborn's cry mingled with the whisper of winter, a tiny sound that carried the promise of redemption. Clara knelt, her swollen hand resting on her aching belly, and softly murmured, "I name you Hope." In that single word, the weight of shame and betrayal began to lift. It was an invocation for new beginnings. Yet, as the last vestiges of the storm died away, a final specter lingered, a dark reminder left by temporary retreat. Silas's threat had not been fully extinguished. On the battered gate of Maeve's trading post, amid freshly fallen snow, another length of burned rope dangled, a grim sign that Amos's bitter ambitions and Rufus's superstitious dread might return in greater force. The presence of that token sent a shiver through Elias's battered frame. In the waning light, with Clara cradled her child in quiet awe and Maeve's ledger clutched close to her chest, Elias's mind churned with one final, unyielding question. Will Amos's final strike shatter our hard-won haven, or can I, with every ounce of resolve, shield this new family from the storm's wrath? With the echoes of battle fading and the newborn cry of hope a beacon in the cold, will their sanctuary endure the looming threat, or will bitter ambition return to claim what they have fought so dearly to protect? Dawn crept slowly over Cedar Notch and Dust Vale Ranch alike, a gentle but unyielding light that drove the last remnants of winter's gloom from a frozen ground. The bitter storm that had ravaged the night now relented, leaving the world wrapped in a fragile calm. Elias Ward, his shoulders still aching from the previous battle and his eyes rimmed with determination, stood on the porch of his cabin. In the distance of quiet frontier town, the first hints of sunrise turned the snow a soft, glowing gold. He knew that with this new day came the chance to settle old scores and rebuild what had been nearly shattered. Earlier, the tumult of rage and ice had peaked when the relentless assault at Maeve's trading post forced Elias, Clara, and Maeve to rally. Amid the howling wind and swirling snow, Rufus Kane and Amos Hensley had attacked. Their hatred, stoked by greed and betrayal, had driven them into the storm. Elias's axe had sung a brutal song against the onslaught, felling those who dared come too near, while Maeve's ledger, a battered record of debts and misdeeds, proved the crooked nature of Amos's claim over Clara. In that crescendo of chaos, Clara had given birth to a tiny girl, whom she named Hope, her soft cry piercing the roar of the blizzard and kindling in every heart a spark of redemption. Even as Rufus had retreated, unnerved by superstitious omens among the pines, Amos's bitter vow of revenge had lingered like a curse. Before the bruised attackers dispersed, Elias had hidden the satchel, its stolen pearl corroborating Amos's crimes, beneath the frozen earth outside the trading post as a safeguard of its dangerous secret. Now, with the storm finally spent, Elias set about his final task, to confront the traitor who had exploited the weak for his own gain. Guided by Maeve's earlier words and the grim evidence in her ledger, Elias embarked towards Cedar Notch, the frontier town where Amos had wrought his lies. Snow crunched beneath his heavy boots as he traversed a vast, open plain. The morning air stung like needles, and every gust seemed to whisper warnings of impending retribution. In his left hand, he clutched his flintlock rifle. In his right, his axe, a trusted tool as familiar to him as the scars born of grief. The spruce charm he always carried, once a memento of his late wife, now swung from his belt with quiet insistence, a symbol of his enduring hope. The journey took him along a narrow trail, winding through frostbitten pines. In the distance, the modest spires of Cedar Notch emerged from the pale haze, a cluster of weathered buildings clinging to existence amid the endless white. As Elias approached, murmurs of disapproval and suspicion had long echoed to the town's frost-covered streets, but today they would have to yield to the force of incontrovertible truth. He entered the town square, where a gathering of townsfolk had formed near the old telegraph office. Their anxious faces, set against the backdrop of a once proud community now humbled by hardship, turned as one when Elias, eyes steady and voice resolute, unfurled Maeve's ledger. "Tally these numbers," he said in a thundered whisper, his gruff tone commanding attention. The ledger's brittle pages detailed Amos Hensley's extensive debts, his fraudulent dealings, and the stolen peril that now lay hidden beneath the snow at Dustvale. The evidence was irrefutable. Whispers ran like wildfire, and murmurs of justice replaced the town's past condemnation. Slowly, the skeptical eyes of Cedar Notch softened to reluctant acceptance as their collective outrage simmered into a determination to right the wrongs of the past. Amos, who had so long banked on the town's gullibility, now found himself isolated. At the edge of the square, a small group of men quickly ushered him away, his pleas of innocence drowned by the unified indictment of his misdeeds. Rufus Kane, his superstitious fear mounting at the sight of the implacable ledger and the resolute gaze of the townsfolk, slunk away into the shadows, leaving behind a bitter taste of defeat. In that moment, justice took root in Cedar Notch, and Amos's greed was laid bare for all to see. Returning to Dustvale Ranch with the weight of his victory heavy yet strangely buoyant, Elias felt his burdens begin to lift. The stolen payroll, once a symbol of shame and exploitation, had become the very instrument of redemption. When he reached his cabin, he found Clara waiting on the porch with her newborn daughter cradled in her arms. The child, small and swaddled in simple cloth, cried softly, a sound that mingled with the gentle rustling of the pine sap outside. Clara's eyes, which had long been clouded with despair, now shone with a quiet light. She had named the child Hope, and in that single word lay the promise of a new beginning. Inside the cabin, Elias gathered Ruth Clara and the little one around a modest fire that now roared with steady warmth. He opened the satchel once more, carefully unraveling the documents with hands that trembled not from cold but from newfound purpose. Seeing the evidence of Amos's betrayal transformed before him, he made a silent vow. The payroll would be used for something good. "We'll rebuild," he said softly, his voice a blend of raw determination and lingering sorrow. Cedar Notch's church will rise again, and with it, a little more hope for all. His words, though few, filled the small room with the warmth of a promise. In the following days, the townsfolk of Cedar Notch worked to repair what had been broken. The old church, long battered by neglect and hardship, began to see repairs funded by the stolen payroll, repurposed as redemption for those wronged by greed. As word spread, the town's judgment softened toward Clara. No longer was she seen as a pariah marked by scandal. Instead, she became a symbol of resilience, a woman who had survived betrayal and had given life to a hope that could mend a fractured community. Back at Dustvale Ranch, Elias set to work carving a cradle from a fresh pine log. With the same care he once reserved for crafting his spruce charm, he whittled smooth grooves and gentle curves into the wood, a cradle to hold the slender promise of new beginnings. Each careful strike of his axe and whittle of his knife echoed the rhythm of redemption, as if every cut erased a piece of his past sorrow. He placed the cradle near the cabin's front door where the light of dawn touched it softly, symbolizing the safe harbor now awaiting his family. Late one chilly afternoon, as snow fell in delicate patterns that whispered across the barren ground, Clara and Elias, together with Ruth and even Maeve Tobin, gathered outside to plant several young pine saplings by the cabin's edge. The saplings, bright against the white drifts, would one day grow into sentinels, their deep roots mirroring the strength of their hearts. In that quiet act of rebuilding, a found family was solidified, one that had risen from betrayal and hardship, bound now by shared hope and a resilient spirit. Standing amidst a small grove of saplings, Elias's gaze lingered on the horizon where the storm had once raged. The memory of that relentless, icy fury now seemed a distant echo, softened by the steady flame of morning and the promise of renewal. He touched the scarred handle of the axe, one that had seen too many winters and witnessed too much pain. In that simple gesture was a silent vow passed down to all present. They were no longer defined by the darkness that had once claimed them, but by the steadfast light of a new day. Later that evening, beneath the soft luminescence of a winter moon and the comforting crackle of the restored fire, the members of this unexpected family gathered on the porch of Dustvale Ranch. The rebuilding of Cedar Notch's church had begun, and the sound of gentle hammering and murmured prayers drifted over the sleeping town. Maeve Tobin's wise eyes, weathered by countless storms, looked upon them with quiet approval. "This is our promise," she said, her voice low and resolute. "From shame and betrayal can come healing." Elias, his heart lighter now though scarred by past loss, offered a final word that carried far beyond the frozen silence. "You're home now," he murmured, not just to Clara, but to hope to all of them. His voice, rough as the grinding noise of a saw on timber, held a deep, aching truth. In that moment, the pain of previous winters, the bitter memories of lost loves and shattered trust, began to thaw under the steady flame of hope. As the night deepened and a gentle quiet fell over the land, Elias stepped outside one final time. With the new pine saplings rustling softly in the cool breeze and the distant church bell beginning to toll a note of renewal, he gazed upward at the star-strewn sky. In the silence, a lone thought echoed in his mind, a reflective question that lingered like a promise at the break of dawn. Will their dawn endure, or will new storms yet test this fragile flame?